As you may know, depression is one of the most common psychological disorders in the United States. A huge part of depression is a feeling of loss of control over one's life. So how does this loss of control come about? Well, today we're going to talk about a study conducted by Mark Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania. Seligman believed that we learn to lose control over our lives, and because of that, we become depressed. To test his ideas, he conducted an experiment that involved dogs and their ability to escape from unpleasant situations. Seligman studied a total of 24 dogs, and he divided these dogs into 3 different groups. One group was called the escape group, one group was called the no escape group, and one group was the control. Now, what he did was he placed the dogs into small cages and delivered a shock to the dogs in the escape and no escape groups. However, the dogs in the escape group had the ability to stop the shock by pressing down on a panel, while the no escape group did not have the ability to do this. Now, to account for differences in time, the shocks were administered to both groups simultaneously. The only difference was that the dogs in the escape group could stop the shocks, while the dogs in the no escape group could not. 64 shocks total were applied to each of the dogs in these groups, and the dogs in the control group were not shocked at this point. So for the second half of the experiment, the dogs were placed into a special apparatus that had lights flashing on the side of this box. Now, when the lights were turned off, a shock would be applied 10 seconds afterwards, during which time the dogs had the ability to escape or avoid the shock. So to escape being shocked, the dogs had to jump over a barrier within 10 seconds after the lights were turned off. Otherwise, they would continue being shocked until they stopped it or until 60 seconds had passed. Now, in this part of the study, all of the dogs from both the escape group, the no escape group, and the control group were placed inside the same box and therefore had an equal chance of escaping. So, what did Seligman find? Well, he found in his results were that the no escape dogs, or the escape dogs, quickly learned that they could stop the shock by pressing down on the panel in the first half of the study. The no escape dogs tried to escape, but stopped making any attempt to escape after 30 shocks. For the second half of the experiment, all dogs from the escape and no escape and control groups were placed into the same box, as I mentioned earlier. Therefore, the only difference was their experiences from the first half of the experiment. The dogs in the escape group easily learned to jump over the barrier and were able to consistently avoid being shocked. But Seligman found that the dogs from the no escape group didn't even make an attempt to jump over the barrier or escape from the shock. They just accepted their fate. And the dogs in the control group were equally able to escape, just as the dogs in the escape group had been. So what Seligman found was that the previous situation in the first half of the experiment had conditioned the dogs to think that they had lost control over their ability to escape. In other words, they'd become helpless. So, to conclude, Seligman showed that dogs placed in a situation of no control failed to exert control even when they could escape from a dangerous situation. So psychologists have concluded from this that human depression follows a similar pattern. Somewhere in a person's life, he experiences a situation that he doesn't have control over, so in situations where he does have control, he doesn't bother making an attempt to escape, which causes him to become hopeless and depressed.